Hey, welcome to Adventures in Angular, the podcast where we keep you updated on all things Angular related. This show is produced by two companies, Top End Devs and Envoy. Top End Devs is where we create top end devs who get top end pay and recognition while working on interesting problems and making meaningful community contributions. Envoy offers remote design and web development services with specialization in Angular for companies that truly care about quality. In today's episode, we'll talk about Angular signals in practice. Our guest, Eduardo Roth, wrote an article about his experience building an app with Angular signals. We'll talk about his first thoughts, what he liked, what he didn't like, how easy it was to use signals, and how to bridge signals with RxJS. My name is Lucas Paganini. I'm the CEO of Envoy and your host in the podcast. Joining me in today's episode is Charles Maxwood from Top End Devs.
Hey!
And Eduardo Roth, our special guest for today.
Hello, good morning, and thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure for me.
Thank you for taking the time. Eduardo, let's get started. So, the premise of today's episode is that we won't talk too much about the theory and concepts of signals because everybody's talking about that, right? So, we're going to talk about how it is to actually use signals in practice. So, how was the experience? I just wanted to kind of pick your initial thoughts and then perhaps we can dive deeper from there.
Okay, so for me, it was like I've been working with RxJS for a long time and having to use the observables and the subscriptions, async pipe, and everything just to have. Well, for example, if you get one observable and you want to have the values in your template, you will need to subscribe to it and then assign that to another variable, or maybe use the async pipe in your application. But with signals, because it's synchronous, you only need to call. This is something that many many people will say that you are not supposed to call a function in your template, right? Because you have to get the value of the signal, you need to call it. But for me, it's like easier to implement or to work with because you are not handling asynchronous values, you are not handling subscriptions. You only need to have the signal, just call it to get the value of it. Sorry. So it, from the developer experience perspective, I think it's a simpler approach to using values and implementing reactivity in your code. But it's not like because there's a lot of talk about signals replacing RxJS, but I don't think that it's a complete replacement, but something that should be used alongside RxJS. So signals have like these synchronous tasks and things that you can use with that, but RxJS still has a place in Angular, in your Angular applications.
So I have two questions on this. One is we've been kind of looking at and reading a whole bunch of things about signals. Like Lucas said, we actually did another podcast episode, and I think Armin went into some depth as far as, what is being said about signals, but I don't think he had tried the reference implementation that they've kind of been putting into Angular, but haven't, I guess, fully released. And so I'm curious, does your experience with signals kind of line up with what people are talking about it being able to do? Or are people fundamentally misunderstanding what it does from what they're reading on the internet versus what Angular's actually implementing or implemented so far?
I think that when people heard about Angular signals, their first thought was this is going to replace RxJS. So this is going to simplify the way that we implement reactivity in Angular, and we no longer have to worry about subscriptions, observables, and things like that. But the real thing is that signals is going to help developers to well, in the long term, it might replace, or it might be it might enable some less applications, but for right now, for developers, it's going to make it easier to implement some reactivity in their code. Like you don't have to worry about observables. But for example, if you want to have a synchronous task or just an HTTP call,
Hmm.
you will still rely with observables. So I think that the first approach that people had was this is going to change the way that Angular works, and it is going to change how we work with Angular, but not the way that people thought.
Okay. But they work more or less like if you go read the implementation in Solid.js or, I think Preact built theirs in. It's going to work mostly the same as those, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I've been checking out some um, differences between the signals implementation in Angular versus the implementation in other frameworks. And it's mostly syntax changes. So there are implementations where you just do like signal dot value, and then you have this
Hmm.
getter property, which if you look at it, it seems like you're just accessing a regular property of an object, but internally it's actually a getter that is registering
Right.
the dependency and automatically updating it when the things that it depends on changes. But on Angular, they decided to really use it as a function. So all signals are a function. So if you have a signal, you just call it like a regular function,
Hmm.
and this is the way that you get the value. But other than that, other than syntactic changes, it's really the same concept. The
Hmm.
and that was a great question because in the Angular RFC, the request for comments that they opened for the community to give their inputs about Angular signals, there was a section about why not just use a library that implements signals, why rewrite it, why create an implementation just for Angular. And
Right.
there are many reasons for that, but mostly is because they don't want to have something that is gonna be such a core thing from the framework depend on an external implementation. So if they want to have full control over the implementation such that they can really integrate it with how they want it to work with the Angular internals. And yeah, it's actually mostly that.
Well, I
Yeah,
could
and
see also if the difference is mostly syntactic. I mean, I want it to be natural to me as an Angular developer to use it the same way I use everything else. And so it just gives them that level of control too, right? It looks like it belongs with everything else. It's not, oh, well, we went and grabbed this thing in and it's slightly different.
Hmm. And that's we can relate this to what Eduardo said, which is we've been taught as Angular developers to never call function inside a template.
yeah.
So that was actually a really interesting decision from the Angular team, like the fact that they chose to use a syntax which forces you to be calling a function in the template. Now they could have just used the get accessor like dot value, and it would actually fix another problem, which is type inference from TypeScript. Because, for example, if you use TypeScript narrowing, so let's say that you have a signal which can either be a string or null, and then you say like um, signal value equals type of signal value equals string, then you know that it's a string, it's not null, and then you can use it in all the child elements, knowing
Hmm.
that it's gonna be a string and it's not gonna be null. So you can do like ngif, and then you have it correctly type checked. But because it's a function, they are actually considering to add a custom type check to the TypeScript compiler checks in the template because it's a function. TypeScript doesn't understand that if you call it twice, it's gonna return the same value. TypeScript thinks, oh, it's a function; it can return different things
Anything.
all the time.
Hmm.
It can return anything. So you can't do the is string check and just expect it to be a string internally, because if you call it again, TypeScript will just throw away the type narrowing check that you did. One way to maneuver that is to create a variable. So instead of just calling the function twice, you call it once and then you save it in a variable. So for example, const name is equal to, and then the name signal being called. and then you just do your isString in the name const that you just created, and then you just did your type check. But the problem is that in the template, it's not so easy to create variables.
Right.
So
Yeah,
um,
I've seen this approach of some developers that it reminds me the days of Angular JS, because they create a constant or a variable in the component called VM, like view model, and they assign properties with the signals. So instead of, so you get the whole view model of in your component, and you can use that in your template, and the values are automatically updated in the component. So you call the signal function, and you assign that to a property. So it technically it works, and you don't have to call the function in the template.
yep. By the way, what did you thought about that when you were building your application? Was it annoying that you didn't have this type narrowing working as easily as it could have been, or do you think that it's okay the way that it is, and the fact that it's a function being called and then you just lose the type narrowing? But what do you prefer?
To be honest, I didn't mind the not having the type narrowing in the template. As long as I have it in my component, I think that
Mhm.
it's good enough. But I think that there's some effort to have this strict template checking or the type narrowing, like you mentioned. So it's going to improve it's going to improve the developer experience. So you know actually exactly what variable and properties you have from your signals. But for now, it didn't bother me.
Well, and I
Okay.
have to say that, we've got some of these things where we're like, hey, maybe it could be a little more, I don't know, perfect.
Hmm.
But I like that there's something out there that, hey, we can poke it, we can put it into our app, we can figure out what's going on, and then we can come back and tell the Angular team, hey, look, this would be really nice. So maybe, yeah, maybe we figure out, under these circumstances, the type checking would be really important. But under most other circumstances, it's pretty consistent, and so it's not a big deal. But yeah, I mean, kudos to them for at least getting something that we can go look at and play with and see what it looks like. I'm kind of curious. Did you feel like there were things that they could have done better, or things that they should improve before they put it out? Is it ready for prime time or not?
I think it was like just in time for developers to try it. It was like they have enough functionality so we can test it, and we can give.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they released the developer preview for in Angular 16 Next O, or the first version of Angular 16,
Mm-hmm.
and then they gave us the RFC around like 1 week or 2 weeks later. So I think that was a great approach. So we can test the current functionality, and then we can improve it with comments on the RFC. So I think it was good enough so we can test what they are trying to achieve, and get enough get enough information so we can comment more on the RFC, and
Okay.
give more valuable comments there. So I think it was great.
Yeah, I really like that. I've been saying that in the past episodes, but I really think that the Angular team isn't being appreciated enough by the commitment that they are having with the community to open up to them and accept suggestions. Because at the end of the day, let's think about it this way: Angular was created by Google. So actually, although it is open sourced and we all benefit from it, and I'm very thankful for it, it was actually made to be used by Google. Like, the interests should be directed towards Google, and they are opening up to everyone to give their inputs and their feedback, and they don't really have any monetary gains from that at all. There's the community effect of, hey, you see that we value your opinion, so everybody
Mm-hmm.
feels that they can actually trust the framework and they can adopt it, which makes the ecosystem bigger, which helps Google at the end of the day. But in a more short to medium term, there aren't really any other benefits that I can think of. for them to do that. So it's really cool that they do it.
Yeah, I think that, well, I guess that the bad perception of the Angular team was from the IB change, because it took like 3 years, if I recall correctly, it took around 3 years to get IB enabled and working for libraries and applications. And I remember that the Angular team at that time was like, oh, the next big thing is going to be IB. You keep an eye on that. And it was like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years until we finally got Ivy, because it was on Angular. I think it was 9, but it was like partial support for Ivy engine.
Mm.
Uh, but after Angular 11, it was like, okay, we are ready. This is production ready for applications, libraries. And then after that, it came like the Angular team was so into the community and getting the feedback. And okay, so we are going to try this stuff, or we want to hear from you. What do you want? And for example, standalone components, it was like a huge thing in the Angular community, and it was brought by the team. Oh, sorry. It was brought by the team, and they mentioned that that Angular team has been so open to the community, and they have been giving us some RFCs to like main functionality or changes that they want. I think that they learn from their mistakes from Angular JS to Angular 2, or
Hmm.
Angular, or plain Angular migration or change. So now, right now, they try to keep everything working, and they
Right.
try to streamline any big changes that they have, and they are really open to hearing back from developers and community.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of want to change gears a little bit just because I'm curious. So what do I have to do in order to give this a try? Let's say I want to go build an app and see how the signals are working, and where I may or may not replace or make signals work with RxJS. Do I just go get the pre-release and then I'm good to go, or are there other steps?
Yeah, exactly. You only need to create an application using Angular 16. I think that the latest is Next 7, but you only need to call the Angular CLI with at next, and that's it. You already have it enabled. No need to enable any flags or anything else.
Oh,
As long as you are
nice, nice.
using. Mhm.
So I guess the other question is, once I have it in, then yeah, how do I start adding it into the app? So do I just
Just
declare a signal somewhere?
Yeah, you only need to create a constant, like const something equals signal, and you add the initial value, because every single has to have. Well, I think that they added a null or no initial value signal in the latest, with the latest changes in the Angular signals implementation. But you only need to call that const something equals signal, and that's it. You import the signal class from Angular core. I think that's the package. So, but VS Code or WebStorm automatically do that, so you don't have to worry about importing, and that's it. You already have a signal working.
Is there anything that doesn't currently work with signals? For example, um, do we have any issues regarding server-side rendering or like any other parts of Angular that maybe aren't as smoothly integrated with signals yet?
I don't think so. I don't use that much as SSR, or server side render. But I think there are no current issues with signals. At least I heard that there are some issues with the standalone components and PWAs and standalone components and server side rendering. But as far as I know, for signals, there are no issues, or that I'm aware of.
Okay. And now I'm very curious to know, how do you actually do the bridge between signals and RxJS? Like, we know that this is possible, but in practice, how is it?
Well, eh, uh, on the first release Angular 16, there I don't remember when they implemented the from observable or from signal methods. I think it was on around B16 next 3. But with those functions, you can bridge between observables and signals, because you can easily change an observable to a signal, and a signal to an observable. And the way that this works is that it uses the destroyed ref uh, life cycle hook. I think it's a class, but you can, internally they use that to unsubscribe the observable when you change that to a signal. So the way that it works is that, for example, if you want to get, right now it's not from observable and from signal. They changed that to be to signal and to observable. So, for example, if you want to change an observable to a signal, you use that function to signal, and internally it subscribes to the observable, and anytime that the observable emits, it sends a new value to the signal. So you get that working from the observable. And when the component, by using destroy ref, the observable unsubscribes automatically, so you don't have to worry about that. And it's really good because you no longer have to worry about unsubscribing your observable. So, and for example, if you have an HTTP call that it's an observable, and you only need to call that and to signal, and you have it working in your component. No longer have to use the async pipe or subscribing in your component and then assigning the value to another variable.
I really like the destroy ref. I know that it isn't exactly the subject here. I know that this is being used by the bridge between signals and observables, but I really think that this is so cool because a problem that I had with Angular, and this is actually the most popular article that I have on Medium, was because I created a library that would allow developers to easily um, destroy, unsubscribe to observables when the component was destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
So it used some tricks with dependency injection. There's also a really good library from um, Netanel Bazal. I think it's, yes, Netanel
Yeah.
Bazal, which is Nginx, if I recall correctly, which also does a really good job at providing a clean way to automatically unsubscribe from observables when the component is destroyed. But everything got so much easier when Angular exposed the inject function,
Mm-hmm.
because when we got that, we were able to just inject the view reference, and the view reference has a callback for when the view is destroyed, and then you can just turn that callback into an observables, and then boom, you can just call like use until destroy, and then you have this observable that is going to emit when the component is destroyed, and then you can just use that along with the take until operator of RxJS to automatically unsubscribe your observables. And that solves a really big problem, which was um, splitting your code. So the place where you actually used the observables was isolated from the place where you managed the subscription and unsubscribed from it. So you had your ng on destroy with a bunch of unsubscriptions, but the place where you're actually using those subscriptions was elsewhere. And then the code gets a little bit harder, not impossible, of course, but a little bit harder to follow because things are separated. So now with Angular 16, they are exposing a new interface to listen to the moment where the component is destroyed. And this injectable is the destroy ref. So you no longer need to inject the view ref and then listen to on destroy. You only need to inject the destroy ref, which at the end of the day, it does the same thing, but it's a more um,
Simpler. Mm-hmm.
yeah, more simpler, and the responsibility is more isolated. Like if you just want to listen to on destroy, you may wonder, why do I need to inject the view ref? What is the view ref? What does that mean? But Now you don't have that problem because you want to know when it's about to get destroyed. You inject something called destroy ref. You're like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting thing. And even to developers that are not going to use signals as soon as it gets released for whatever reason, this is actually super useful to clean up your observable subscriptions. You can fully get rid of ng destroy in most components, because most components in ng destroy, the only thing that they do
It's
honestly is just
unsubscribe.
unsubscribe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you can create an operator function and then just add that to the pipe in your observables and it will unsubscribe there. So it's going to simplify the way that I think that what the Angular team is trying to do is simplify the way that we work with Angular, having to learn the uh, fewer uh, topics or things before we can start, and having it the mental models that we have to think about. I think that they want to have something that it's really easy for beginners to start working on, and it's going to simplify the way that expert developers code. And well, I think that this is something great that they are doing.
Me too. Me too. And it's also good for the advanced use cases, right? Because
Yeah.
signals make the application much more performant. Like the real problem that signals solve beyond the developer experience, which is a problem. Not gonna devalue that, but the other problem that it solves is that when you're in a really big application, even if you're using on push change detection in all your components, you're still not getting all the performance that you could get. Because if you're
Yeah.
using on push, like you're already doing manual change detection, like you should get more benefits than the benefits that you do get with on push. Like for those of you that maybe aren't aware of, when you're using on push, a lot of developers think that if you're using on push, it only detects changes to your current component. But that's actually not true. It still checks the parent components too. Like it's not going to check the child elements and
Mhm.
child components from your own push component, but it's going to go upwards because it starts from the top until it gets to your component always.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're still doing unnecessary checks at that point.
Yeah, and now with signals we get this fine grained reactivity, and any change any signal that triggers a change will just update exactly the part of the component, and it no longer have to recreate or check any parent or child component. And also we finally can get rid of Zone.js, and this is something that the Angular team is also working on. I think that on the next release, it's not going I don't think it's going to be labeled developer preview yet, but they have this on Bootstrap application. They are going to uh, add a function to provide the Zone.js function, so you can disable that and handle the change detection by yourself. This is not something that it's going to be production ready yet, and it's something that we might not see even on Angular 17. But this is, uh, I think that finally we will be able to have full zoneless application, and we can remove the overhead of having Zone.js loading and monkey patching every single uh, event in the browser. So this is something. This is also something big that will land on Angular. I expect sooner than later.
Mhm. Um, Actually, I've never seen anyone removing Zone.js from production currently, but I know that this has been a possibility for a while now because you can just inject zone no op,
Hmm.
and then if you provide zone no op in your app module, then it's not gonna use the actual implementation of zone. It's just a mocked thing that doesn't do anything. It just provides the interface that Angular expects for Zone.js, but it doesn't actually do anything. But I wonder, like, this exists for a while. The zone no op exists for a while. But if anyone uses that currently, how do they code an Angular application? Like if you use on push change detection, then it works with zone no op.
No, you will need to add the check for, well, mark for dirt and check changes, or I don't remember the exact function names, but you will need to handle that by yourself, and you will need to add a lot of extra code that the Angular team is trying to reduce, so you can well, I think that by the end they are trying to get rid completely of Zone.js, but they are
Mhm.
because they know there are a lot of applications that might rely on that or might not be updated really soon. They still keep that, so they are giving us the chance to uh, still use Zone.js or remove it completely, and they will make the transition easier for us to just, let's say you provide, I'm not sure if it's going to be an OAuth function, but you are going to be able to replace the Zone.js implementation in your Angular applications, and that's it, and you are going to be able to have a full zoneless application. I think that there are some libraries that actually use that kind of approach. For example, I remember RX Angular, or that's something that works with RxJS, and I think that they have this zoneless implementation, or they have this guide on how to implement RX on Angular without zone, or disabling Zone.js.
Hmm, interesting. Okay. There is another entire topic that we haven't uh, gotten into, but I'm really curious about, which is migrations. So, first, do we have an easy path forward, maybe with tools that the Angular team is going to create to facilitate a migration from zone based components to signal based components, or will we have to do it all manually?
And that's something that some developers have asked me. I know there's an schematic for migrating ng modules application to a standalone, but for this type of change for zone and at least for signals, I don't think that this is something that it's simple, well, that it's easy to create an schematic, because the way that your application, you might have some observables and you might have some variables, and the way that we work right now with RxJS and libraries, I don't think that it's going to be easy to create something that works for everybody. I guess that it can give some recommendations, or like kind of like some ESLint rules where with warnings, or like information notices, like this is something that you can change, or you can replace this observable with a signal and to signal method. But I don't think that's something that I don't think it will be possible, or at least with my knowledge, I don't find it easy to create an schematic to automatically migrate this. uh, it can be a combination of things, but at the end of the day, you will have to manually update a lot of code. I guess it can give you like this recommendation. If it finds some observables, it can say you can create a signal and just call to signal method, and that's it. But to actually manually update your code, I find it difficult to do. Yeah, so I think that this is a huge change that will, well, it depends on the size of your application, but I guess that this is some, you are going to add some effort to actually migrate or change to signals completely if you rely a lot on RxJS and observables.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, I imagine that that would be the path forward, because you're right. Like this is too intrinsic to the way that you organize your code base for a tool to automatically migrate it. I
Hmm.
mean, if a tool could do that, then I don't think it would be a regular schematics. They would have to use perhaps artificial intelligence to try to figure it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't see that happening so soon, which is a shame because it would be so cool, right? If like
Yeah.
new things were released and then you just run a script and boom, you're in the new version. That would be awesome. That's actually one of the things that we do a lot in Envoy. My company is like we do a lot of Angular upgrades. Like the client comes in and they're like in an older version of Angular, and we help them migrate to the latest versions. This is kind of like an entry service. You know, it's like you don't know me, you I don't know you, but I see that you have this need, and this is a service that we can get started working together, and then the partnership goes from there. But it's interesting because um, it's getting easier to do upgrades. Like even though we're talking about something so big as signals, everything else that existed before is still supported. So upgrading to Angular 16 doesn't break your zone-based components, doesn't break what you had before. It's like you're still gonna get more benefits. You're still gonna get performance improvements, security improvements, developer experience improvements. But those new features, they are optional for your use. So if you don't want to use them, then that's okay. Well, at least for now. I imagine that eventually they're going to they are really not mentioning that. If you look at the RFCs, they're being very clever with their words. But the thing is, eventually, I think that they're just gonna drop Zone.js. But this is
Yep.
probably gonna take a very long time because they definitely don't want to make the entire community angry by making this big change so soon. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that they will mark those or zone applications or everything as deprecated, and they are going to leave like two or three major versions, and then they are going to be removed. So that gives enough time for the LTS, well, the latest Angular LTS version to for companies to catch up. Here at Hero Devs, we also work on Angular migrations, and one thing that you mentioned is that you can actually tell this is something that they work on, because on the first versions of Angular, Angular 2, and then 4, 5, 6, and I think that up to 9, you have to do a lot of changes in your code, manual changes in the way that your application is built. But after that, if you jump from 9 to 10 or up to 16, it's just like it's really easy, and everything works. Even if you just change the Angular version, everything works, and you can have your Angular application on your latest version. And if you want to get the benefits of the latest changes or the latest updates, you have time to do that, and you can like plan an upgrade time or project so you can implement those features while still having your application working in production. So I think that this is something that the Angular team has been doing really good, like don't breaking anything. They learned their mistake from Angular JS to Angular. So
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And actually, that's another good point. I know that this what I'm gonna say may sound distant from the reality of most developers listening to the podcast, but I assure you, it's not so distant. There are a lot of developers in this situation, which is there are a lot of developers working still on Angular version 1. There
yep.
are still many applications that were written in Angular JS and they haven't been migrated to Angular version 2, 4, 5, 6, whatever. They are still running Angular JS. So they're not, we're talking about like the benefits that we're going to get with signals. Like there are people that haven't even gotten the benefits from like the Ivy compiler and typed forms. Like there's so many things that those projects are not getting because they are still on Angular JS. And I remember that there was a time where the Angular docs they had a clear migration path from Angular JS to the latest version of Angular. But it's been a while since I haven't read that or seen how this is looking like nowadays. But I do wonder, as we progress in terms of features, and again, I'm not complaining about that. Let's add as many useful features as we can. But the more we progress, I imagine that it might get harder for those that are still running AngularJS to migrate to the latest versions of Angular. Um, do you have any information about that? Like, have you recently done any work from migrating AngularJS to a latest version of Angular? How is that migration path?
Well, uh, actually at Hero Devs too, we work on migrations from AngularJS to Angular. So right now I'm working on one, and we are jumping from AngularJS latest version one, which was 1.8, and we were working on migrating that to Angular 9 because that was the client application Angular version. But then they started working on updated that, and right now they are on Angular 13. And actually, the change from Angular 9 to Angular 13 was just so small. It didn't require that many changes. And this is something that it's kind of like a complete rewrite. Well, if you were using Angular JS components, then it's kind of like similar, not the same, but you get like the live hooks, and you already got the on init methods on destroy, so it's kind of similar. But if you were on previous version of AngularJS where everything was on the controller and that directive, uh it's going to be a huge change, and you will probably have to almost rewrite your whole application to support Angular. So that's a huge effort to take, and that's the main reason that many companies still use AngularJS. Actually, for example, Microsoft was current recently released the Teams application, the Teams version 2, or I'm not sure how they call that. And they released the current stack and the previous stack of technologies. Right now, they are using React, which is a shame because they should have gone with Angular. But the application that was running on production was AngularJS. So it was like uh, even in 2023, we still use the major companies are still using AngularJS, which is good because the application or the framework still works, but bad because where are the security fixes and the performance and application improvements of latest frameworks and technologies. But to answer the question, it's a huge effort to switch from AngularJS to Angular, and that's the reason that you can still find many applications and companies still using AngularJS. But as time passes, it's going to be more complex and complicated. And right now, AngularJS is, I think that it stopped getting any security fixes for 4 years right now. So as time passes, it's going to be more complicated and harder and riskier for companies to still use AngularJS. So
Yeah. So what you're saying is that in terms of migration, we're kind of at the path where we're kind of at the point where you don't really migrate, you just rewrite.
kind of you can use if your AngularJS application was using components, then you can kind of like copy paste and then just update a couple of things. But if it wasn't, you will need to rewrite your application. So it's not like just call the CLI migration script and you got the Angular application running. No, it sadly it's not that easy. So you have to do a lot of manual work.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, but that actually sounds like a fair point. Like you can just upgrade to the latest version of AngularJS. You try to migrate everything to Angular components, and then after this step is done, then you are more prepared for the actual migration to the latest version of Angular.
Yeah, exactly.
But now we're actually getting to a pivotal moment on that, because even the life cycle methods are changing. With like
Yeah.
signal based components, they have different life cycle hooks. So even that is like, it's kind of like a window that is rapidly closing. Or well, they could just still migrate to zone based components, which would still be better than Angular
Than having
JS.
Angular JS. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and that's a
interesting.
great thing because even though that we are getting new lifecycle hooks and that signals is going to change the way that we code Angular applications, the previous way of coding still works. And it's not going anywhere soon. So if you are, for example, a company that it's currently moving from Angular JS to Angular, they don't have to worry that hey, I'm getting behind and this is going to be deprecated too, and then I have to worry about migrating to signals, and then I will have to create to do another migration project. So it's safe to say that uh, if you migrate right now, it's still going to work. Your application is not going to be like it's still going to be good enough to go.
Nice. Um, One big problem that we haven't touched about in terms of migration are the other libraries, right? And I'm
Yeah,
not even talking about the problem of migrating from Angular JS to Angular. I mean, if you upgrade from Angular 8 to Angular 9, it can, everything is going, everything that is Angular related and that you wrote is going to keep working, because that was when they introduced the IV compiler. But um, if the libraries that you depend on still don't have support for that, then you might have a problem.
yeah. Yeah,
So
if you go well, I think it was on version 11 or 12. I don't remember the exact version, but they removed the view engine completely. So if your library doesn't support Ivy, then you are left in the you won't be able to use that, or you won't be able to update to Angular 12. And that's something that Chao Tran shared on Twitter. He is the developer behind Angular 3. He mentioned, or he posted a poll that if a library right now in Angular 16 used signals, were you well did were you expecting to it have support to previous version of Angular which doesn't have signals? In my case, I think, well, I voted to don't have support for previous versions, but I know that many companies doesn't have the developer force to keep on latest versions. And also, if you go like, if your company policy is to be one behind, then it might create some problems or troubles, because you are going to have like the latest version of the library only supports signals, but I don't support signals yet, and the previous version is not getting any support, and if I have a bug, it's not going to get a bug fix. So it might create some problems with third party libraries. But as long as Angular is related, they are trying to keep everything like simple, like don't break anything approach. But as you mentioned, third party libraries are a different world, and it's going to be a thing in its own.
yeah, yeah, that was a great point. Like Angular can do as much as, they can help a lot with keeping old versions still being supported and doing patch releases. But if the third party library that you depend on doesn't do that, then you're just left hanging, right?
Yeah, but I think that in the end, this is something good because it it kind of forces you or developers, third party, well, company developers, third party libraries developers, and the same Angular framework developers to be up to date. For example, I remember that it was until Angular 11, I think, that Internet Explorer was fully removed. And if you think that up to that point it was like 5 years with no support for Internet Explorer until we could remove that from Angular. So by having these quick or faster deprecation paths, I think it's something good, and we no longer have to worry about having these old or legacy systems still working.
Definitely. Um, well, Eduardo, I know that we've completely diverged from the initial subject. That's the thing about this podcast. We're always diverging. But I think that was really, really great. I think we should start wrapping up because otherwise it's just gonna get like a
Yeah.
super long episode. But um, if if I may, I'd like to close with one last question to try to help the developers that find themselves in that situation of like, it's not that they can't do the update, but they have to convince the management side that it is worth doing this update. And it's a really difficult situation to be in because I can understand both parties. I can understand how management doesn't want the risk and the, quite frankly, the money investment of migrating their systems. But it's also like, I also think that's a bad decision because it's a ticking bomb. You know, the longer
Yeah.
time passes, the harder it gets for you to recruit developers because nobody wants to work on old technologies, and the ones that do accept that, they understand that they are losing their career progression a bit because after you stay, like, you join a company that is working on legacy technologies, when you leave this company like 2 3 4 years afterwards, then during this period you're not gonna have a resume that other companies are gonna be interested in because they are probably not using those legacy technologies. So this is bad for management because it gets harder for them to attract and retain talent, and it's also bad for talent because they need to work on something that it isn't that beautiful shiny thing that you are excited to work on, and they hear about the updates and they're like, oh man, I still haven't gotten the updates from like Angular 2, and they're talking about Angular 16. That's so sad. Um, but I wonder what could be an advice for those developers, those tech leaders to bring that conversation to management. And yeah, like, how would you go about this if you were in the developer situation? And also, do you think that the individual developer should be the one that brings that to management, or maybe the tech leader or the CTO itself?
I think that this is something that any developer in the team can raise their hand. This is something that this is inevitable. So sooner or later, you will have to do that migration or just deprecate your whole application. But the thing is that uh, I think that the first thing that you can approach management or just the stakeholder for the application is that the security risk of having that's one major issue. That if you are still on Angular JS for the company, this is a security issue or concern. Even it can be a huge problem because you are no longer getting. There are some end of life support services, XLTS, which is a side company of Hero Devs provides that, and they currently release updates or security patches. But if you don't have that and you still rely on latest AngularJS version, you're a target for any security breach from anybody. So that's one main point to bring to the table. Also, the other thing is that as more time passes and as more developers shift to latest technologies, Angular, React, Vue, Solid, even Quick, you are getting you won't have enough people that for one know how to work with Angular JS, and two, that they want to still work with Angular JS. Because right now the people that we still work with Angular JS is people that we were there when Angular JS was released. But for any developer that maybe from 3 years past, they are no longer using Angular JS in anything. They are using Angular, React, So it's going to be harder to find new people that might support your applications in the long term. Also, as you mentioned, this is not something, if you have two open positions and one is for Angular and the other is for Angular JS, the developer is going to jump to the Angular one. So that's something that is to think about. Also, as I mentioned, this is inevitable. So sooner or later, you will need to migrate. This is you can have the Angular JS application running forever. So this is something that you will have to do, and the more time it passes, the more complicated and harder it's going to be for you as a company. You will require more people, or the effort is going to be bigger. So well, if you do it sooner, it's going to be, even though that it's going to be a huge effort, it's going to be better to do it before it's too late.
I like that. Um, just one expansion, because you touched on a really nice point, which was security. I think that it's kind of hard for developers to bring this topic of security, because there is a real misconception that um, the big security risks are in the back end, not in the front end. And I
Mhm.
don't disagree. I I think this is true. Like, if you have a security vulnerability in the back end, that is generally much more um, a much bigger problem than front end security issues. But still, this is a problem. So, do you have specific examples that maybe the developers listening to this can bring to management, in terms of like, these are the security risks that you are accepting to have because you are still on Angular JS?
I don't have any example or a specific examples right now, but for Angular JS or actually any front end framework that you are using, this is the face to the users that or to your clients. So you might have like 1,000 clients, 10,000 clients, 100,000 clients that use your application. So if they target your front end application and they inject some code, they can, the reach is for all these people. Imagine that someone injects, breaks your Angular JS applications, injects some component or HTML and JavaScript there. So all these 10 or 100 thousands of users that you have will have that security breach, and it's using their browser. And now you have the web containers, and then you can spin up anything in your from the browser. That's something that Stack Blitz uses, so they can have Node.js running on the browser. So if you think about it, if you have a security breach or a security issue on your backend targets you and all the information that you have, but it's at the end of the day, it's your company that it's the target. But for front end applications, the security breach, the target is the users. So as it impacts, if you have a lot of users, it's going to impact them, and nobody wants to have well, to be a user of a company that has been targeted by hackers. So I think it's not a specific example that you might have preferred, but I think that if you realize that all your users are targeted by the security breach, then you realize that it's a huge problem company wise.
Yeah, no, I love that analogy. Is security vulnerabilities to the backend affect your system. Security vulnerabilities in the front end affect your users, and at the end of the day, they need to trust that your system is secure. So, I like
Yeah,
that. Nice.
thanks.
Okay, awesome. Eduardo, that was a great conversation. I really like how in depth we were able to go into a lot of things that are related to the new versions of Angular, not just signals. We were talking about migrations, and I think that was a really useful subject to bring to the audience. And yeah, let's go to picks and promotions. So, starting with promotions, is there anything that you were working on or that you did a product that you have, anything that you want to promote, like this is the moment where you can literally use this space as if you were a sponsor and just say whatever you are promoting.
Well, right now, in my personal case, there's nothing. I've been trying to build a couple of side projects. You know, as developers, we tend to have well, extra domains for side projects that we imagine or that we are working on. Right now, I don't have any, but for Hero Devs, the company that I work on, there's open spots for Angular developers. So if you want, you go to herodevs.com and you can go to the job board and apply there. It's a great place to work, not only for the projects that we work on, but the people that it's there. It's an awesome place to work. So that's my that was my moment. Thanks, I
Awesome.
appreciate that, Lucas.
No problem. And we're going to put the link to it in the show notes. So if you want to check out the open roles that they have on Hero Devs, then you can just go to the show notes and see about that. On
Also,
my side, oh, sorry, go
sorry,
ahead.
sorry, I forgot. I forgot. I'm also the co-organizer of the Angular community meetup on, well, en español, in Spanish. So we have this meetup each second Tuesday of every month. So I will also share the link to you. So then the next one is May 9th. So if you want to join, it's completely in Spanish. And the what we are trying to do is to get more people or get more content in the Spanish for developers that might have that that prefer this content in their mother language and not exactly on English. And this is the official or the ngconf sponsor meetup. So that's also a huge plus. And also there's, well, I am also a Ionic developer expert, and we are going to have on October. I Right now I don't have the exact dates. I think it's 17th, but I will share that with you. So there's going to be the Ionic Conf for this year. It's going to be live, and I forgot the name of physical. Well, it's going to be a physical event, so it's going to be on Dallas, Texas. So it's going to be huge too. Sorry if that was
Okay.
like a lot of mix up information, but I remember all of that right now.
No problem, no problem. That was funny. It's like, oh, I don't have much. Well, actually, I have a lot. So, but that's
Yeah,
great. And it's really nice to know all those other things that you're involved in. And that tells me how much more knowledge we can get from you. So I would be honored if you want to come back whenever. I'm sure that there's a lot to talk about in the Ionic side of things.
yeah,
I'm sure that there are a lot of new things to talk about too. So
yeah. I
yeah,
saw
man.
that you have as guest Simon Grimm. He's a
Yes.
huge developer in the Ionic community. So I don't think that I can match that, but I can do my best. So we can. Well, I happily join another day and have a topic for of Ionic if you want.
Awesome. Okay. On my side of things, I'm only going to promote my company. So, Envoid, we do design and development remotely, and we specialize in Angular development. So, if your company needs help with anything, or you want help with migration, you're on Angular JS and you want to migrate, or you're on a legacy version of Angular and you want to upgrade, or you just want to develop a system from scratch, like all of those things, it's well under our domain. So these are all things that we do. If you're interested in that, you can check out unvoid.com. For companies that want to completely outsource their project, we do that. We have plans that are fully managed, so we can do everything for your project, from design, project management, development, all of that. But if you do want to have like more control and you want to be part of the process and just manage the individuals yourself, that's also super okay. We also do staff augmentation. So if you're interested in any of that and you need help with your project, then be sure to check out unvoid.com. Also, if you don't have this need, but you know somebody that does, you can refer a client and earn up to 10,000 US dollars, which to me, which am in Brazil, that's a shit ton of money. So uh, if you find yourself in that situation and you have somebody to recommend, then I'm going to put the link in the show notes. You can go to envoy.com/refer clients. There's a hyphen, so refer hyphen clients, and then you can just submit the form, and we'll talk to you and put you in our referral program. So this way you can earn up to 10,000 US dollars. Jesus, that's so much money. But yeah, these are my promotions. And in terms of picks, like interesting things that maybe are not related to Angular or technology at all, that I want to bring, I'm just gonna bring the Apple TV series about WeWork. It's called We Crashed. It tells the story about how WeWork started out and they grew as a company up until the point where everything went to shit. I'm really enjoying the storytelling. It's captivating. You can't stop watching, and I haven't like finished the entire mini series just because like I only watch when I'm at lunch. Otherwise, I'm just gonna waste an entire day and not have anything to watch afterwards. But it's really good. So it's called We Crashed. It's available on Apple TV. So if you're into that, highly recommend. How about you, Eduardo? Do you have any particular picks?
No, well, I been watching this show with my wife. It's I don't really don't remember the name on in English. It's kind of like this, Mom, why are we follow or something like that. It's on Netflix, and this is the tale of a mother and her daughter, and they are like kind of escaping. And but there's something odd with the mom. So if I tell anything more, it's going to spoil the show for everybody. But it's a good show. It's kind of weird at the start, and you start to wonder what's happening and why. But as you follow the episodes, it's like getting more. You're getting more context of what is happening. So it's really well. I find it good enough to watch.
Awesome. Okay, I like that. Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you for your time. Like honestly, this was such a valuable episode,
Thanks,
and
Lucas.
I hope it was valuable for everyone else that was listening to this. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucas, for having me.